to have you. We might just have a few more folks trickling in, but we'll go ahead and get started. If you haven't already, feel free to drop in the chat box, say hello to folks, let them know what community you're from. It's really good to see you. I'm Hannah Harrod. I'm an organizer with the Rural Organizing Project. Love seeing so many familiar faces, some faces of folks that I've talked to on the phone before, but never met in person, or in person, quote unquote. So I'm feeling excited about that. Nice to see some new folks too. So we are so excited to be together tonight for this call. Thank you so much for joining. As I'm sure all of you on this call know, which is why you're here, we've really never had the rural internet infrastructure that we need for our communities to have, full participation, for everyone to have access to internet, for, so many folks working from home, for students, for just daily life. And even now, with the winter storms too, so many folks losing power for days and sometimes weeks this year and in the last winters as well. It's just so clear that our electrical infrastructure really also needs serious investment. So we're just thinking a lot about, what does it look like for us as this, big, phenomenal creative network to be working on broadband in all the different ways that some of you already are, I know, who are on this call. And what are, new things we can try on and experiment with together. We really just wanted to take space tonight to dig in, to hear from some folks about what they're doing to meet internet needs in their community, and to do some kind of big thinking together about what might be possible. So it's really wonderful to have you all here for this conversation, and we're looking forward to digging in together. Before we jump in further, I just wanted to share with you all the roadmap to a thriving rural Oregon. I'm just going to pull that up on the screen. If you are on the phone with us, or you're not able to access the video, you can go to rop.org/roadmap and then see what we're looking at too, but I'll kind of talk it out and share. But if you want to have a visual in front of you, that's another place you can see it too. Some of you have been on a lot of the ROP strategy sessions we've been doing since the pandemic started, and you're like, the roadmap, you could probably be the one to share all the categories on the roadmap. So exciting that we're getting to spend so much time with this, but for folks who are new, I just wanted to kind of run over it a little bit again. So this roadmap to a thriving rural Oregon is a tool that we put together as the ROP network, starting with these strategy sessions that we were having after the pandemic hit, where we were really getting into how do we meet each other's immediate needs in this crisis, but also how do we really be organizing big? How do we be thinking about what are the things that we need for our communities to be able to weather crisis differently in the future, to really have the resources that we need to get through something like this and to thrive, right, beyond crisis. And so then we had, hundreds or more conversations with leaders all around the network around what are our priorities? What would that look like for us? What would need to be in place for us to really all be thriving? And out of that came this roadmap to a thriving rural Oregon, which we just love. And it's really been now a tool that we're using for conversations, as human dignity groups across the state with local elected officials, using it to set our priorities and think about, we just entered a long legislative session in January that's going to run through the end of June. And so we're also kind of putting together now, really looking at what legislation is up and how does it relate to the roadmap that we've created together as well. And I'm excited. I know Representative Pam Marsh is on this call, and she's going to talk a little bit more too about some of the legislation related to broadband. And Oriana, I think, is also going to speak to utilities legislation. So anyways, lots more about that. But the roadmap, so there's kind of four main categories of the roadmap, and I'll just kind of run over them really quickly. The first one is we are all essential, and that includes healthy and accessible learning environments for all kiddos, universal basic income and a living wage for all workers, free childcare for all, and safe housing, childcare, schools, and workplaces. Next up, we have healthy people make healthy communities, and that includes COVID testing, tracing, and treatment sites. Since we put this roadmap together, we're also now adding vaccination, like accessible vaccinations across the state for folks, everyone who wants one. Releasing people held in prisons in unsafe conditions, including prisons and jails and detention. Healthcare for everyone, something that the pandemic, again, has made even so much more evident that we really need. Sustainable local food production and healthy food, clean air, and clean water for all. And then we have safe and welcoming communities. This includes safety from state violence, which was something we really dug into on our last strategy session. You can also check out that recording if you missed it. I know some of y'all were on it, whose faces I'm seeing today too. You can go to rop.org/strategy session though if you want to watch the recording, where we really got into more of the organizing folks are doing around keeping our community safe from state violence 2 weeks ago. There's also, under safe and welcoming communities, we've got invest in rural Oregon for the long haul, affordable housing and utilities for all, one of the things we're hitting on tonight, inclusive democracy for all, forgiving rent and mortgages, and ending detention and deportation, and providing permanent protection and dignity for all immigrants. And then last but definitely not least on the roadmap, we've got connecting our voices as a critical piece of this. So that includes fully funding the United States Postal Service, publicly funded community media, celebrating rural Oregon's mosaic of experiences, and broadband internet for all, which is obviously a big part of what we're here to talk about tonight. So we're really excited about continuing to dig in with you all on all of these things that we need to thrive. And tonight we are going to be focused on internet and utilities. Thanks, Emma. I think you can stop sharing the roadmap now. So quickly tonight, kind of what we're going to spend our time together doing. We have a few folks lined up who are working on rural internet solutions and utilities and accessible utilities as well. And so we're going to hear from those folks to just kind of share what their organizing is looking like to kickstart our thinking about what our organizing in our home communities could be. And then we'll hear from them, and then we'll open it up to discussion with y'all in this whole room. So. And by room, I of course mean Zoom room. I wish we were all in an actual room together. So a couple quick things about how to use Zoom if you're new to it. You can mute and unmute yourself. There's a little phone button if you're on the computer. If you're on a phone, you can hit *6. So if you're trying to talk and it's clear that we can't hear you, you might be muted, and you can unmute yourself by hitting *6. During the discussion, feel free to unmute yourself and chime in. If it gets a little hectic, we can figure out how to have, some raised hands, but typically it's been working so far for you to just feel free to unmute and jump on into the conversation. If you can also find the chat box if you're on video, or if you're on a computer, it's at the bottom of your screen. If you can't see it, it looks like a little talking bubble. If you can't see it, there's a button that has 3 little dots that says more, and it might be hiding there if your screen is too minimized. So feel free to pop into the chat box if you have things you want to add that way. We'll also drop in some links and stuff throughout the conversation, I'm sure. Feel free to drop in resources that you know of for other folks there as well. We can use that space as well as part of the conversation tonight. Awesome. Thanks again. We're really looking forward to this conversation. And Carissa, I am going to kick it to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Hannah. My name's Carissa, Carissa Modine. I use they, them pronouns in my name, and I'm so excited to have you all. We're really looking forward to kicking it off by hearing from folks across the state who are organizing for internet access and affordable utilities for all. And so first up, we have Jonathan. Jonathan, would you like to introduce yourself and start us off?
Hi. I'm Jonathan. Can you all hear me?
We can hear
Great.
you.
Hi. I'm in Klamath Falls, Oregon. I'm outdoors right now, so I apologize if there's some audio issues. So I'm out here in Klamath Falls. I'm a teacher. I organize with our local DSA. I've worked with some of the ROP folks before on organizing for broadband, and something we're working on with Central DSA, Southern Oregon DSA, which is our chapter, some folks up north, is building a policy platform that can be used in the 2022 election cycle to push for broadband for all. And something we're really looking at is building off of the TVA program, the Rural Electrification Project that FDR had put out during the New Deal programs in the 30s. That language of the New Deal is something that's being talked about at all levels of the Democratic Party right now. So we think that this is a good strategy to use in creating a competitive public resource for broadband internet, especially for these hard to reach areas like in Klamath Falls. So we've had one public talk via Facebook Live with Jimmy Skinner, Pam Marsh, and some other major organizers in our area. And we hope to build on that with the rural organizing project and others in the field, and create some policy platform that progressives and others can really get behind. So that's kind of what we're working on now.
Awesome. Thanks, Jonathan. Next up, we have Indira.
Oh, hi. I was invited to come and talk about what I've been doing in Eugene with students at Lane Community College. Is this where I'm supposed to do my 3 minutes? Okay, I wasn't sure.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So I'm not really doing any mobilizing. I'm kind of doing what you call Band-Aid, picking up the pieces as an instructor of English as a second language and at Lane Community College. And we have classes in Cottage Grove. We have students in Oak Ridge. And we are the county. We are not just Eugene and Springfield. So we really want to reach the whole county. And that's part of one of the things that I noticed when I started noticing that there is a big disparity in internet access in the rural areas. And so I was brought here or asked to just tell you the story of what I've been doing. So last March, we went online. As you all know, COVID, all the educational institutions went online, and we scrambled. And that's when we realized how many people didn't have access to reliable and strong internet that would allow them to effectively participate in educational opportunities. So that it was really clear that yes, you can connect with a cellular phone or whatever, but you're not getting the same quality of education. So 2 instructors from Lane applied for an Oregon education grant, and we were able to get some cable installed in Oak Ridge for 2 of our students who are still continuing to study in our English as a second language program right now. And then as students were coming back each term, we began to realize that as we were trying to recruit students to come back, because the storm had calmed and we really wanted people to start, we realized we're going to be online for much longer. We want people to come back and study and improve their opportunities through education. We realized that a lot of people just didn't have access to internet. So just as a small initiative with the department, we did a GoFundMe and we raised $1,600, and I was able to buy 3 hotspots, and those are distributed across Eugene and Springfield right now. And then while I was working on all this is when I got connected with the ROP, and I applied for a hotspot, and you guys were so nice to give us a hotspot. It still has not been distributed, but spring term is coming and we'll have more students coming in, and the need will probably be there. But I'm just here because I just want to support you all, and if you want to ask questions, that's fine. But I feel like this whole issue is an access to healthcare, access to education, and it's extremely important. And I really appreciate the work that you guys are doing. It's a human rights issue. If people don't have a basic utility in order to have access to all the things that everybody in this community need to have. So I'm with you. I hope that's what you wanted me to say, Hannah. I wasn't sure, but okay, I'm done with my 3 minutes.
Thank you so much, Indira. Next, we have Representative Pam Marsh. I believe I saw you on here.
I'm here. I'll unmute.
Thanks, Pam.
Hi, everybody. Great to be with you tonight. And I think my 3 minutes was just to talk about what might be going on at the state level around broadband. So if there was a good thing about the pandemic, it was helping everyone to recognize the technology gaps that exist across the landscape. Certainly those of us who have been deep into this understood ahead of time that there are many people who are just not online across the state. And in some cases, that's because of a lack of infrastructure. In other cases, it's because of affordability. There may be services available, but they can't afford to link up. In other cases, it's education or the lack of devices or language barriers. But one place or another, we know that a significant number of Oregonians, and the number is probably 20% in urban areas and more than 40% in rural areas, don't have anything near what we would contemplate as reasonable residential broadband as determined by the FCC. So we've been working on this for a couple of years at the state level. When I got elected first in 2016 and came to Salem interested in the question of broadband, because I came from Ashland, which has had a municipal broadband system for more than 20 years. And I was surprised when I got here how little focused effort we were putting into developing what I think is our most powerful economic development tool. And now, after a pandemic, we also know that it's a way that you attend religious services or participate in your community or go to school or work or a multitude of other things, communicate in the case of a crisis. So we've done a couple things over the past 2 years. First, we established a state broadband office so that there's somebody at the state level who is responsible for overseeing broadband development. So that was a big step forward, although in all honesty, I'll tell you that office is still not staffed in the way it needs to be very effective, but we do at least have a foothold there. We also got $20 million in CARES Act funding that came from the feds dedicated to broadband projects. And as a result, we're able to distribute about 10 million to communities across the state for different projects, although there were some limitations on what kinds of projects could apply for that. And frankly, $20 million when you're talking about broadband infrastructure is a drop in the bucket, but we did do that. And then we passed a piece of legislation last summer, which will establish what we hope will be an ongoing stream of funding to apply to the broadband office to be able to use for planning and technical assistance for projects that emerge out of our communities that will help we have to help communities who are not online understand what that even looks like or how to even approach the process of putting together projects that will put them online. That's the backdrop of what we're doing. I'll just quickly mention a couple things in this session. The governor has recommended in her budget, which sometimes gets beat up pretty bad in the legislative process, $118 million to go to broadband. Of that, 10 million would go to schools. A chunk would go to the Oregon Housing Agency for distribution, probably to publicly supported housing. And 100 million of which is yet to be defined very well. But what I'm initially told is that it would go to projects across the state, distributed in a way similar to the way that we distributed the $10 million that came out of the CARES Act funding, basically grants to communities. And then we have a couple of infrastructure bills that get in the weeds, and they're important, but they don't they don't provide a vision of how all this moves forward. They just address some of the technical problems. One is to require ODOT, whenever the State Transportation Agency is building roads and opening trenches, to advertise that to broadband providers so that they have an opportunity to negotiate and put their conduit in those trenches. There's no point in digging a ditch if you can't do multiple things in that ditch. And then there's another bill that will make it easier for our electric co-ops, which are in some of the most rural parts of the state, to string telecommunications on the poles so that we can use those electric easements that are already established also for telecommunications. Again, it's not a visionary kind of thing, but these are the kinds of nuts and bolts that we think added up over time will help us to address some of the infrastructure barriers. And then I have a small bill that we're about to drop. So those are the infrastructure challenges. Still, we have the affordability challenges and trying to figure out how do we establish a regular subsidy program that can be drawn upon, as we have for energy, right, Oriana, and in the state, but for broadband. It turns out we have a model of that called OTAP, which sits in the PUC, but it can only be accessed essentially by people who have landlines. So they can use that subsidy money to help pay for their landline or associated broadband bill. It's a really good system. We know how the money gets in, we know how to get it out, but we need to modernize it and broaden it so that that mechanism can possibly be available to many more Oregonians. So we have a bill that would require a study of the OTAP system to say, how can we modernize this, get a lot more providers to participate, serve a lot more Oregonians? So that's in a quick nutshell. That's the kind of work we're doing at the state during the session right now.
Thanks so much, Pam. Next we have up Meredith. Would you mind introducing yourself?
We can't hear you, Meredith.
You are muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you so much, Meredith.
Sorry about that. Okay, yeah, I'm actually on rural internet right now, and so my Zoom camera's not working so well. So if my face is stuck, I apologize, but that just seems fitting for this conversation. So my name is Meredith Martin-Motes. I work with ROP on the podcast and a few other things, but actually live in Arkansas. And my other job is I'm the director of an organization called the River Valley Adult Learning Alliance, and we serve 5 predominantly rural counties in central Arkansas, and we work with adult learners to help meet their learning goals. So that can mean getting your GED, filling out job applications, learning English, working on family literacy with kids in school, things like that. So we got really involved in broadband work in Arkansas because like I've heard echoed from other people in this call, when COVID happened and it was like, well, go to online learning. It was like, well, that's not an option for most of the people that we work with. So we applied for a grant from our local community foundation to get some hotspots for people so they could, study from home. But what's really been eye-opening for me about that is in my mind, I was like, I'll just get hotspots and then I'll just pass out hotspots. Like I thought that would be like this easy thing. And then, so it really opened my eyes up to how we have, at least in Arkansas, this sort of patchwork. Oops. Sorry, I accidentally did that. We have a patchwork of like different rural carriers and sort of do hotspots. And so there's a lot of complications. Even just getting a hotspot is not as simple as it sounds. And we also have CARES Act that was being talked about a minute ago. In our case, most of the money right now that you can apply for is basically to incentivize competition between potential rural carriers. So one of the things, though, that we've been able to do is really, or we're trying to do, is hopefully demystify what even broadband means, because I know for me personally, as soon as I started working on the issues, I realized I didn't even really have the vocabulary to really be dealing with it. And I realized that a lot of people also didn't, even though they wouldn't say that out loud. And so we've sort of together used this first grant that we got. We got several hotspots. We worked out a discount program with T-Mobile. We've gotten those hotspots to people. Now we've had success stories. So we're trying to really leverage those success stories and really push the envelope in terms of saying, like, look what changes can be made when someone has internet access. So like there's one person we've been working with who lets us share her story a lot, and she passed her acuplacer exam, which is to get into community college. Then she got into community college. Then she landed a job working at the community college, which she could apply and get because she had internet access at home now. So now she's in community college and she's employed by the university. And she did all that work. All we did was just help get her access to what should already be a public utility. So we're really trying to leverage that small amount of funding we got to be able to say, like, when you give people these resources, it changes everything. So we've put together like what we call our dream team of thinkers from around the area, from about 5 different counties. It's a lot of library people and rural fire department people and stuff like that. And we're just sharing a lot of information, because my experience is that broadband is a world that's pretty mystified. And I think one of our jobs as organizers is we can demystify that and really have concrete conversations about it. So I guess my big takeaway really that I want to share is, like, leveraging any kind of accessibility that you can to really push for a bigger conversation about what it means to provide this as a public utility. do you still want me to talk about what's happening in Arkansas, or am I running out of time?
You have about a minute and a half, so go right ahead.
Okay. Okay. Well, Hannah and Emma had asked me to talk a little bit about this. It's a bit of a jump, but I think there's some connections we can make here. I'm sure y'all saw on the news what happened in Texas with the winter storm. I'm in Arkansas. We had the same storm, actually with some even lower temperatures. We were down to -2 and -4 here, which is first time that's happened since like 18 something or another. I certainly don't remember it in my lifetime. But we did have rolling blackouts as well. But unlike Texas, our grid is much bigger. It contains multiple states, and so the need could be dispersed across several states that weren't also experiencing a storm. So our blackouts were short. And so I'm not comparing our situation to Texas at all. We had a much better situation. But I think one thing that I did notice a lot was just, how much lack of understanding people had around how blackouts work and how sort of the grid works, and how that, and I include myself in that. I mean, I don't presume to know a lot about the grid either. But one thing that I also noticed is how that fear, because we've never experienced that here in Arkansas, really led to people moving into a lot of conspiracy theories about socialist takeover of power, and they're getting us prepared to turn all of our systems off and things like that. But I think what it showed to me is that, people are really scared. And so when we have these moments, which we will have more of as climate change continues, that we really need to demystify like what's going on with these systems, and work together with our neighbors. And I think that really goes hand in hand with the need for broadband as public utility as well. And I'll end it there.
Thanks so much, Meredith. Next up, we have Oriana. Hi.
Hey, Carissa and I know each other from a different time, so it's really exciting to see Carissa here in the space, and also exciting to see Rep Marsh, because she's involved in some of the things that I'll talk about tonight. So before I kind of dig into everything, I'll frame a little bit about who I am. My name is Oriana Maniera. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Energy, Climate, and Transportation Manager at Verde. So a big part of what I do in my work is demystifying the grid and the dense world of energy policy, which often tries very hard to keep people out from really engaging because of the ways it gets kind of weedsy and wonky really fast. And so my organization functions in the Portland area. Typically, although we're starting to do some more statewide organizing, we have an energy plan for a neighborhood that is an environmental justice community that has a lot of pollution and a lack of infrastructure investment. And one of the communities, at least in the Portland area, that doesn't have good broadband access for a lot of folks. So during COVID time, we've been very concerned about how to do our organizing in ways that connect people. And before I dig into like the broader work, one of the early organizing experiences I had in Oregon was doing some statewide political organizing and having a conversation with someone from Fossil, who talked about how hard it was to connect to the statewide work we were trying to do because they didn't have good broadband access, and how they were fighting for that infrastructure. So that's always stuck with me. And as I've started to do more utility focused work, really thinking about who has access to infrastructure and who does not, and then who has access to utilities, which we believe in my organization are a human right to have that access to staying warm, to staying connected. And in this COVID moment, we see that more and more of how that's played out. So we're working on a couple of different things, some in the legislature and some in the Public Utility Commission, but that's all underpinned by an Energy Justice Leadership Institute, where we have folks from around the state learning about energy and energy policy, kind of learning to demystify the grid as much as we can, and then engaging in some grassroots organizing around this political work that we're doing. And if there are folks in this space who are interested in connecting to that more, we're still taking folks into the second phase of EJLI, and then we'll have a third phase that we hope we can maybe make a little more co-creatively than the first two phases, to focus on project development and kind of community organizing around energy, and help folks to connect to the infrastructure in their communities, to connect to the grid in the ways that are meaningful for them, and help to address some of the other intersecting goals that come up with energy. So in the Public Utility Commission space, there's actually a really important meeting today because our investor-owned utilities, which are Pacific Power, Portland General Electric, Cascade, Avista, and Northwest Natural on the gas side, kind of the bigger utilities in the state that are owned by shareholders and not owned by ratepayers the way cooperatives are, or a municipality the way a municipal utility or public utility district is. These bigger utilities have had a moratorium on disconnecting folks and using disconnections as a way to make people who are behind in their bills pay their bills in order to get reconnected. And we believe that it's not just. We don't think anybody should be disconnected from power, especially over the last week when a lot of folks had the experience, at least in the Portland area, of what it's like to be shut off, which I think was an interestingly timed experience given the conversations that happened in this kind of wonky, more privileged policy space. But the commission decided today that rather than allowing disconnections to resume in April, which had been the suggestion, they're going to resume them again in July. And there's going to be a really big organizing opportunity in May when everyone comes together to talk about how to address unpaid bills and whether to continue with this resumption of disconnections in these investor-owned utility service territories. And so we'll be working with Rogue Climate and some other organizations to really mobilize a lot of folks to push back on this idea that we should be disconnecting people at all, that this moratorium should extend much further, and we should find creative solutions to addressing unpaid bills. And one of those possible creative solutions is one of the bills that we're working on with Rep. Marsh, which is a bill to enhance energy affordability by allowing these bigger utilities that have their rules set by the Public Utility Commission to create lower rates or discounts for folks with lower incomes. Right now, everybody who's a residential ratepayer, which is all of us for the energy, if we use energy in a home, we all pay the same rate, but people are affected differently by different bill sizes. Someone who has a $300 bill and makes a lot of money, that's not such a big deal. But if you're living in a manufactured home that is not very energy efficient and your energy bill gets run up in lots of ways that you can't control, that can be really impactful. And we know from the colleague community that a lot of folks end up making choices between whether to buy food or medicine or keep their utilities on. So we really want to see the opportunity to have lower rates for the folks who need them. And with that bill, there's also an increase in funding or creating a new pot of funding for organizations who represent BIPOC communities, which are Black, Indigenous, and other people of color communities, rural communities, coastal communities. Many of the folks who are in this conversation today could potentially access funding to engage in the Public Utility Commission and have more of a say that's resourced about the decisions that affect everybody when it comes to our energy system, but a very few number of people actually get to access the decision making. Right. The other two bills are a Healthy Homes bill that would create a pot of money to just do health and safety upgrades of all kinds for people's homes. Because we know as people spend more time in their homes, the health and safety and things like asthma triggers can be more severe. And that's really important during a respiratory pandemic to make sure that everybody has a healthy, safe, stable home. And then our third bill is to allow for 100% clean energy in our utility system. And we would include both the investor-owned utilities and some of the larger consumer-owned utilities like Umatilla Electric Co-op, who purchase or develop some of their own power, and trying to create some parity across our system so that everybody is having access to clean energy, and that there are also good incentives for community energy projects and allowing local communities, especially those communities in Eastern Oregon or on the coast where there's a lot of offshore wind potential, can have benefits and good local jobs from these projects, and that we're not just getting all of our power from out of state. So that's a lot that we're working on.
Awesome.
And yeah, that's the wrap up there. Thanks all for your time today.
Thank you so much, Ariana. Next up and lastly, we have Janie.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me all right? I'm hoping this
yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. There might be a little bit of a lag. So I apologize for that in advance. But before I get started, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Janie. I use she, her pronouns. I am an educator. I am based out of Clatsop County in a small community, the Jewel Elsie community. I'm also a fellow with a current fellow with the Rural Organizing Project. And some of the work I've been doing around basically what we're talking about in this strategy session is myself and a small group in our community have been working to create a community center for our community. When we began this work, we had started kind of formulating this group right around the beginning, prior to the beginning of the pandemic. So when everything hit, that kind of created some big challenges for initiating this group. However, it kind of got us starting to think about ways we could be organizing in our communities in a way that was also, we were able to navigate around the challenges of the pandemic. And so more recently, I found out through Hannah about the hotspot program. One issue we have been having is with our local school, kids having access to internet in order to do their homework, either with regards to just accessibility because of where they live or affordability for their families. And so we applied for a hotspot, and it's awesome. We just got one. It hasn't been distributed yet, but we are currently partnering with the school counselor for our local school. The school has initiated, they have 2 hotspots in partnership with our local church. They have one based out of the parking lot at the school, so people are able to stay socially distanced and safe, but kids are able to use their devices and their parents as well, and within the school parking lot and at the church. But there is also a large portion of the community that lives farther away from those locations who did not have access to those. So what we were really hoping was to partner with some other organizations and infrastructure in our community, including the local fire department and also some local restaurants who would be willing to give us access to their parking lot, so that way we could start using the hotspot there, and then hopefully as things start to shift and change, be finding new ways to use these mobile hotspots, so that way not only kids in our community, but other families and other groups and members of our community can be using the hotspot for whatever they need. So that's kind of some of the work that we've been just doing on the ground level around this. And then, yeah, I'm just trying to make sure I have some notes here. I want to make sure I hit on all this stuff. That's pretty much the gist of it, of what I have to talk about. I'm sure I have plenty more time, but that's kind of the gist of it. If there's anything else you'd like me to just let me know.
That was perfect, Jamie. Thank you so much. We're actually going to be opening it up to discussion, so I'm sure folks might have questions and things like that, but I'm going to kick it over to Emma.
Thanks, Carissa, and thank you so much to all those speakers. I was like, oh my God, I need to take notes on this. This is all so good. Well, yeah, so we have another 45 minutes to open it up for broader discussion. I'm really curious. I recognize some names on this participant list and some familiar faces, but who else is working on broadband? What are some ideas or projects that you all are jumping into? Or if you do have direct questions based on what other folks are saying, feel free to jump in with those too. Well, if we have multiple people going at once, that's okay. We can call on folks, but for now, let's just jump in.
Hi, my name is Michael Barrow. I posted a note in the chat there. I'm in Lane County, and I'm a computer engineer with too much idle time on his hands. And what I am trying to do is to help rural communities build out their own broadband solutions using a technology. There's a technology made by an Oregon company that allows you to fairly inexpensively band together and build out your own broadband network. So it's entirely possible. There are a number of communities around the state and around the country doing it. And I'm interested in doing that in Lane County. So I'm a technical resource, called some folks and they said, oh, I don't know anything about building networks or anything, but I do. I've been doing it for 30 years. And I'm here as a resource to help people. It just needs volunteers and people that are willing to band together with their neighbors to build out networks. So Michael at barrow.me, or I can leave my information on the chat. So folks in Lane County, I'm currently working on trying to do a pilot in Pleasant Hill. But once we get that going, I'm hoping to go to Cottage Grove, Creswell, Dexter, whatever we can do. So please get in touch. Thanks.
Michael, could you describe the technology? What's the technology you're using?
So actually the software is by a company called Althea. And it basically is the least expensive way is by using point-to-point wireless. So it works by finding a broadband source in the community. So like maybe there's some fiber in the community, and then you can build a point-to-point wireless network from that kind of hub, and then bouncing it off different households in the region. And then basically the routers that go into the house, they have a technology into them where it pays each device pays the device that's downstream. So if I have a connection to the network and you live down the road from me, we can set up a connection between our houses, and your device will pay my device, which will pay the device upstream. So that's at a very high level. That's how it works at a technical basis. So the advantage of this solution is that instead of it is a very easy way for folks to have an incentive to expand the network, because there is a payment and it's a pay-as-you-go system. So if you have a connection and somebody near you wants to have a connection too, you get money that pays, they pay your device. So it can help expand the network. And it's a very simple technology to deploy. It doesn't take a lot of time, but it is entirely scalable to some of the things you were talking about earlier about putting in fiber in the roads. It will still work with those technologies, but to get going up and running very quickly, you use point-to-point wireless Wi-Fi type technology.
And if I could just, is it okay to chime in here with another comment about that? I want to really validate what Michael is talking about in terms of communities taking control over their situation. The very kind of network, not exactly technology, but a wireless network was what we used in our little mountain community outside of Ashland, where we really struggled to get anybody to pay attention to us. And we realized that there was fiber that we could pull up by putting an antenna on the tallest mountain, and we pulled up the internet from Ashland Fiber Network and distributed it in a wireless system. And we formed just a co-op. So the residents own the broadband system. There's money in the bank. Everybody gets pretty good fast internet. There's some issues when it snows, but the community basically put this together. And I think it's really important for communities to understand that they can be empowered. I mean, within certain barriers. But we put that system together with, I think, an initial investment of $6,000, and now it has 80 families and money in the bank.
This is so good. Yeah, who else is working on projects? Thank you, Michael and Pam, for sharing both of those. I saw people dropping in the chat like, oh, I want to get connected, or tell me more.
Michael, as a computer engineer, I was wondering if you could call Ben Broadband and give them a piece of my mind. Sorry, just a aside there. All right, that's it.
Are there groups advocating with their internet service providers or their public districts to get some of this stuff passed or get some of this moving in their local area?
To continue, not about Ben Broadband, but I was doing some research, and because I believe in like looking at what's already out there. And well, I found out that both Hillsborough and Maupin have their own network set up, which is pretty cool. And that there's a best practices study done by the Oregon Business Development Department as of January 31st of 20 on how to do some of this stuff. And that's found on, I think, broadbandnow.com. But there's a ton of organizations that I wrote down that are involved in, there's a broadband advisory committee, which I'm sure the representative knows about, that's appointed by the governor. There's a broadband, there's all kinds of organizations, and there was a grant that was granted by the USDA of 10.3 million, but I think it's gone now. There was a grant that Lynn County and Polk County got for rural internet, called the Peak Project, 13.2 million.
That's awesome.
So I think being aware of some of this stuff, you know, through some of these organizations, what they're saying about the towns getting their own system set up is that it's a lot of times it's a combination between private and public monies.
Jonathan, did you raise your hand because you're also working on one of these similar grants, or?
No, I was just looking up on the internet trying to see what was out there, because I believe in just seeing what's already been done, you know, so we don't try to reinvent the wheel, and seeing, you know, if there's corporations out there doing stuff, then, you know, and they're, you know. And then I also contacted the chair of our local Democratic Party, and she was saying that Merkley and Wyden have submitted a bill for $4 billion. It hasn't, it's sitting right now. It hasn't officially been submitted. And that the towns of Madras and the county of Jefferson County are talking back and forth about doing a feasibility study about whatever it is they want to do. I mean, I just found this out last night, just as I was kind of preparing for tonight, to find out what we were doing.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Those are all really great resources for folks to know exist. Jonathan, were you trying to jump in there as well?
Well, I just had a question, if I could pose that to the audience, if that's appropriate. So in this effort to kind of build some unifying policy, I'm curious to those who actually do the work in the field, if there's a connection to union and labor interests within the workers in the field doing the electrical work and so on. To what degree does Broadband for All serve other interests that the union might have? And to what degree can that be used as leverage in the political field when it comes to pushing this agenda?
I love that question. Does anybody have an answer or a partial answer?
I can jump in because we are actually doing a lot of organizing with labor as part of the campaign we're doing right now. I think anything that is like local infrastructure development, labor really likes, because those are a lot of jobs, and those are jobs that kind of stay in communities and are distributed around the state in ways that can really meet the needs of their members. So I think you'd have a lot of support. There would probably have to be some language around like, what is the quality of the work that's done to achieve universal broadband? Like in order to take advantage of a policy or an incentive or opportunity, labor usually likes to see good standards, prevailing wage, benefits, apprenticeship opportunities, workforce equity metrics attached to that kind of work. But I think you'd have good allies, and I'd be happy to connect you with the IBEW folks in or Building Trades Council folks in Southern Oregon.
Yeah, that'd be great. The more connections we can make, I think the more realistic policy that more people can rally behind.
Yeah, I also saw some folks on the phone unmuting themselves. I don't know if that was because you were trying to jump in, but
that was me unmuting myself.
Were you hoping to jump in there?
Yes, I could jump in there. I live in Rockaway Beach, Tillamook County, and somebody let slip at a county meeting that there was something called Tillamook Lightwave. So being a telecommunications engineer and a curious fellow, I dug into it. 20 years ago, Tillamook Lightwave was founded and has been plowing fiber throughout the county for the last 20 years. And if you are a library or a school or a government building or a large corporation, you have their fiber. If you're a member of the peasantry, you don't. Although their charter said it was basically to give it to the people of Tillamook County. So I've been gingering these people to actually start providing fiber. And when you look at it, and a lot of you are not aware of this, and I point this out to people, there is more fiber in Oregon than a vegan potluck. We have fiber everywhere. And here in Tillamook County, we have a bunch of landings, in other words, cables coming across the Pacific and down from Alaska that come ashore. We've got tons of fiber. We're just not utilizing it for broadband for the user. And what we need to do is start doing that. And if you start digging up fiber maps and things like that, which are not always easy to find, you'll find that there's fiber running not far away from your house. And, you know, I'm not the only person that talks about this. Cory Doctorow, who is a member of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, he's on the board. He has the same problem. He lives in Burbank, California, and the actual fiber goes actually under his house, but they won't let connect any into his house. And so what we have to do is start convincing the people who put the fiber in to let us use the fiber. They have the bandwidth available, and then they say, oh, it's too expensive. And then you have to come back and say, you're a utility. Utilities look at 20-year amortization, not 5 years, not 2 years. Put it in. And if you can run companies that lose money like Uber, you can start putting fiber in for people who can use it. It's a utility. This is part of the Green New Deal if you want to think about it. Before we put in telephones into America, thanks to the Tennessee Valley Authority Rural Electrification Administration, which is now part of the USDA, you know, we didn't have telephones. So we need to just push to get this done. A lot of the infrastructure is available. We just need to spread it out, connect it up, and manage it. And the best way to manage it is via municipalities. I could go on for another 45 minutes, but I'm not going to. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was fabulous. I have not laughed that hard in quite a while. We need more fiber everywhere. Who else was trying to jump in there? I saw a lot of emojis and reactions, and looked like there were quite a few folks that were excited to bounce off that. Nobody? One of the other questions that we had, if folks don't have other kind of specific examples of broadband work or utility work happening across the state, is we were curious, since it does, so many folks are bringing up like the model, that the options that we have available are often using or trying to work with these for-profit corporations that are trying to make as much money as they can when we're trying to get as many people on affordable internet as we can. And shifting into this public utility kind of framework, we were curious if folks are drawing on or have examples in their communities of public infrastructure that's working really well, whether it's a cooperative that's doing a grocery store or a public utility commission or district in their area. What's working well? What are some things that you maybe don't want to replicate when it comes to broadband? All these models are certainly imperfect, but just wondering, yeah, how can we draw on those models, and what ideas do people have of like, oh, it would be great to bounce off of this infrastructure that already exists, or at least model ourselves off of that?
It appears that the more once counties or countries go public, the programs become very popular, but once we give more and more leeway back to the private sector, they can price fix and engage in uncompetitive behavior that tends to make the quality go down, and then puts the whole notion of the public enterprise in question. So I guess my leaning is toward more public and being more critical of the private. It seems like the funding to get private companies to reach areas like ours, historically, there hasn't been much return on that public investment. That's not to say that it couldn't happen. The history is just not showing that it is terribly effective.
Pam Marsh mentioned Ashland HomeNet. Ashland City also runs the electric utility, and they're both terrific. Oriana, are you working with Shannon Souza, who's doing offshore wind out of Coos Bay?
Yeah, I actually just saw Shannon over the weekend. We're doing a lot of work together. Thanks for checking.
Okay, good. She helped me put in, I've got some land in Bandon, and I'm trying to use saltwater batteries. She helped me put them in for solar. And in trying to figure out how to make that go further, I actually just called the IBEW and asked for referrals. You know, I didn't need a connection, and they really knew all the people, the contractors in the area.
That's awesome.
They're a great union.
Are other folks building relationships with local union folks or working with their PUD to start these conversations?
This is Julian McCassie back again. We have the People's Utility District here, which actually carries a lot of the Tillamook lightwave fiber on their poles and rights of way. And I've been talking to them along with my wife and a couple of friends about running municipal fiber here. They've got the poles. They've also got the bucket trucks. They've got the personnel. They've got everything in place. When your public utility has everything in place to put in fiber. And a lot of fiber has been put in by electrical utilities, including one in Indiana I was dealing with in the 90s. So what you need to do is talk to these people and keep talking to these people. And I used to go to the Tillamook Lightwave monthly meetings before the plague and constantly ginger them about this and provide them with any number of good tales about rural fiber. There was one in the New Yorker magazine that was wonderful about the second poorest county in Tennessee that, with the help of a mule, put fiber in. So, you know, you just need to keep talking to people about this, and this is what you need to do. And my wife has really been leading the organization of this. I just provide, you know, the vim and vigor. She actually knows what to do next. But you know, if there's fiber there, we should be using it. And you know, it's a utility, and it's a 21st century utility. It's not a 20th century utility like electricity and telephones. So that's what we need to explain to people. Did I cover everything? Okay, thank you. I'm done.
I love it. How can we be using our different skills to really push this forward and bring everyone in the community along? Yeah, how are other folks thinking about, like, we have this powerful network of rural organizers across the state. How can we really be leveraging our network? And obviously this conversation is a start, but are there ways people are seeing like, wow, it'd be amazing to get to be really putting pressure on the state and the federal level for these resources, or supporting each other and putting pressure at the local level to make this really happen?
I think we should just keep turning up at various meetings. There's an annual meeting called Oregon Connections, which is a telecom internet fiber meeting. And we could, I showed up there last year, but we could show up, as a group or separately. And that's where you'll bump into the people who are in that business and you can talk to them. And that's what I've done. And the PUC were having meetings, the Oregon PUC were having meetings about extending universal service, the traditional idea that everybody has a right to a telephone line. And should we extend this to everyone has a right to broadband? And there are various people. There's also there's federal agencies and state agencies that are pushing this, and we just need to get together with all of them and keep knocking on their door.
Thanks, Julian. Yeah. I'm curious, for the folks that haven't spoken yet, are you, I see people like, mulling over things, and some folks obviously can't see, which makes Zoom facilitating fun, but are there real barriers that you're like running up against as you're trying to engage with your people's utility district, or engage in just talking to folks about broadband, as Meredith was bringing up? Or are there other ways that you're like, that is an interesting question, but I'm actually asking this other question over here?
I'm just mad that when our street was all torn up for a year, nobody thought to put extra cables in.
I love that. Yeah. How can we be overlapping all the work that we're doing?
Can I put a question to Michael? Oh my God, I just saw you on mute. I heard that you're, working with Althea sort of technology as you're figuring out your mesh network. And I dropped in the chat box one example of a co-op in Klatskanai. And I know from talking with Deborah, who helped to found Althea, that one of the really cool things that I found so exciting about the model that they're using is this idea that, having it be a community-owned network means that, right, folks aren't going to get kicked off if they can't pay their bill that month, or, there's just so much more ownership over like making it affordable to begin with, but then also following that, being able to really make decisions from a place of community support. And, so anyways, I'm just curious if you have thoughts about that and how that will work for you all in the networks that you're trying to set up, and what it might mean for it to be, sort of owned by the folks who are utilizing the internet on the network, and if there's anything you would want to share about that model.
Sure. I was going to talk about, as far as things I need. I'm kind of an odd person out because I am not actually in a rural community. So I am, pretty much an outsider trying to go in, not to go in to sell some snake oil. I'm trying to go in to help people realize that, that they can come together and take control of their own destinies. Like I said, I've been in the industry for a very long time, and, kind of the shenanigans that we've kind of talked about with the fiber being put in and the telecom companies getting federal grants and actually not putting any resources or infrastructure into rural communities. I'm kind of fed up with that. And I saw this as an opportunity to kind of hands-on, go to the people and do this. So I personally, I have officially a company that I started just so we could have a kind of organizing framework. But I would love it if I interact with a particular community and help them get the co-op started and have it take ownership of all of the equipment. And I am just there as a resource to help them do this. So that I totally love the model. That's one of the great things about Althea. I looked at a number of different mesh networking models that are around the country and around the world. And one of the things that I didn't like, for example, New York City has one called New York City Mesh. It's a nonprofit, but it's built entirely on donations and grants. And not that grants or donations are bad, but I didn't like the idea of trying to build something that would not exist if the grants didn't come through or if the donations didn't come through. I wanted something to be somewhat self-sustaining. One of the great things about the Althea model, like you said, you can build the co-op. It can be built basically at cost just to cover your costs. And it can be built out in an incremental way. So we don't have to dig up all of the streets and lay fiber and put up telephone poles and that kind of thing. You can really start building it small and then spanning out. The economic model works very well for the scale. And again, the technology and the kind of how it all works is scalable. So when you do get to the point where you are able to get the Tillamook Lightwave folks or whomever to put in that fiber, you can keep using that model or transition to another model that that you see fit. So it's a great way to do that from a technical standpoint. It's a great way that from an organizational or community standpoint to build that co-op and come together. And it does work very well. It's not a for-profit private model. It's not about feeding the shareholders. It's about helping the people and feeding them with broadband so that they can get healthcare, get work, do school, and all the zillions of other things that we need broadband for these days. And just a final comment, it's not what I call the lane broadband that a lot of these for-profit companies have been putting in. It is real high-speed connectivity that we're talking about 100 megabits or faster. You can actually build that in rural communities and actually have full Zoom calls and not have to take turns doing a Zoom call when you have multiple kids that want to do online classes. So this is very powerful stuff, and it can be built very easily and very inexpensively in all of the communities.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing all of that. I got a direct message from Bruce Kelsch that he's trying to unmute his phone, and then we're going to go to Karen after that. Bruce, can you successfully get unmuted? Nope, not quite.
All right, try this. Can you hear me this way?
Yes. Oh, you're.
All right, hold on. All right, so one of the questions I have is, we're talking fiber optics, but is there a way of doing a co-op using satellite or cellular broadband? I know there's an organization called Calix out in New York. It's a consortium of people and they've dropped their rates. So at least it provides accessibility, but it's still maybe $50 a month, which is for some people not affordable, but it's a lot cheaper than say satellite, which doesn't seem to work very well. Also, I've seen that T-Mobile and Sprint, because of the merger, they're doing some interesting things with cellular home internet options at a flat rate of $50. It's not everywhere, but if there was a group of people or a consortium I mean, is one way just to skip the fiber. You're not going to get the same speeds possibly, but at least it might answer the accessibility issue more easily than relying on having cables being laid. That's my question.
Those are great models. I know, sorry if anyone else wanted to talk. I'm familiar with Calyx myself. I know that some nomadic folks that are living in vans and whatnot, they use Calyx as one of their internet options. The satellite is typically not good. You don't get a lot of speed. I know there's some stuff going on with Starlink that it might be a differentiator as we go forward. The cellular option, there are flat rate plans, but you might also run into caps. So a model that, like what I'm describing, that the Althea uses, where you're using the fixed wireless, the point-to-point wireless, allows you to have a lot more broadband, a lot more speed. And that kind of fits into that model. Let's all pitch in together and build a cooperative and build a sharing model. I think that works better. At the same time, the Althea folks are doing some work with some private LTE, so private cellular technology that has a greater reach than some of the wireless with a decent speed. So again, it is a great platform to build all these different technologies on. But I think the working together to build a wireless network, which can be augmented with fiber as it's available, or cables, makes sense. And building, and rely upon that, building a cooperative based on that, rather than trying to do some of the mobile wireless. It just doesn't have the same capacity going forward to provide the bandwidth that folks are needing to do school and work and all that stuff.
Thanks for jumping in there. Karen, I know you've had your hand up for
Yeah.
a minute. You want to jump
Okay.
in?
So to flip my other statement around, when you send this out, can you send information on the relevant bills that are up in the legislature for us to watch? I think some of those were mentioned, so.
Yeah, definitely. And if folks are also, we're tracking a few. I know Jonathan's also tracking a few, and Pam and Oriana, but if other folks are tracking bills that you are excited about or want to share, drop the numbers or drop a description in the chat box so people can see those. I've also seen quite a little thread going on in this chat box for folks that are on the phone or just can't read and listen fully all at the same time. There's folks chiming in about affordability and how that would go a long way if we could get broadband to be affordable for people that already do have the physical infrastructure there, but just can't afford to pay that bill. So trying to do some problem solving around what we might be able to do on that front. What else do we got in here? And then the physical infrastructure is also a problem that some folks might be able to afford it or would be willing to work on affordability, but even if they could pay $1 million, there's no fiber near their house or there's no Wi-Fi co-op. So I love this. Hilly areas, that's a great question. What do we do in hilly areas? I don't know if anyone has an answer to that one or a similar experience of it being challenging, but.
I was writing in the chat. It can work in hilly areas. I'm trying to figure out Pleasant Hill right now. They should call it Pleasant Hills. There's tons of hills all over the place. So one of the problems is, even if you have a lot of hills, there may not be any houses at the top of the hill. And if there's no house, that means there's no power. So you have to come up with creative solutions. You could do something like solar, but we're in Oregon, not Southern California, so we don't have an infinite supply of sun. But there are different options that you can do. At the same time, with the trees, you can do stuff with trees. One of the Althea organizers, I think he's actually in Washington. He's putting antennas in trees, up towards the top of trees. And we had a discussion that wouldn't work as well because when the trees blow, they wiggle around and the signal, but he's actually having really great success at doing that. He was able to connect a member that was really kind of a little bit remote area who was forced to work from home. And he went and put the antenna way up in the tree, and that person is online now with really decent bandwidth. So it can work. One of the advantages is that you just have to think creatively and roll up your sleeves and do what needs to get done to get everyone online. It's definitely a possibility.
Well, yeah, and you mentioned solar. In Sherman County, they're actually putting little trailers, like very mobile trailers with solar panels on top and an antenna, and that has been working really well. And you know, the east side of the state gets some more sun, and they were having that exact problem. People have their houses at the kind of base of the hills so that wind isn't such a big issue, and then building solar powered broadband antennas is seeming like a really great solution there. I don't know if anyone on the call has direct experience with that example or are trying to do something similar in their area, but I love it. In trees, on top of houses, solar powered. It seems like we put our heads together, we can figure out a solution for almost anyone. We are nearing in on the last few minutes of this discussion, but I'm getting so energized. I'm curious if anyone is like, oh man, this is getting me thinking about this new project or this new idea, or even just like, that was so helpful to hear from this person. I want to try that in my community, or kind of where you're hoping to go from here. It would be great to hear or read in the chat box where folks are at. We also take these strategy sessions as a way to figure out where is asking for resourcing and support. So it's really helpful to hear kind of what are you taking away from this? What is this getting you excited to jump into, so we can see where our priorities should be leading and how we can be best supporting the network. So all feedback is good feedback. We got some things in the chat box. Affordability. Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to quickly add that I don't know if there's folks on this call who relate to me in this, but like, I am not a techie person at all. And so when we first started really like diving in and talking about broadband, I was like, I don't understand what any of this means. Like, it can feel so complex and overwhelmed, and overwhelming, but something I've been really reflecting on in these last months is like how much we need to be actually approaching this as organizers and with organizing strategy, right? And knowing that like there are the tech people, Michael, Julie, and other folks on this call, right, who are like, okay, I can help you figure out the pieces of it. Like, how are we able to like approach this as organizers and jump in? So anyways, I just wanted to name that as well, that if you're like really excited about figuring this out as an organizer, but you're like, oh, I do not have the tech skills, like, do not let that stop you. We can, you know, help connect and put together the pieces to be figuring this out. If you're like, you or your group is really excited to start jumping in on some of this work and you're not sure where to begin in terms of like the actual tech pieces of it.
I would say too, like, don't let that stop you, but actually let that mobilize you, because I know someone mentioned earlier, like, I mean, the language is in some ways not always meant to keep people out, but it sure is really convenient when it does. And like, and sometimes it really is. And so I think that like, it's a really, I know one thing we've had success with in the organization I work with is we actually lead with our confusion. You know, we will be like, that's a not accessible explanation. Like, can you tell me what that means in a way that I can know what you meant by that? Like, you know, and so I think we can really, as an organizer, kind of lead with asking questions and really demystifying it and really kind of calling attention. Because my experiences have been in a lot of community meetings, and a lot of people don't want to admit that they don't understand it because they feel like they should already know. But a lot of times they don't, even though they may be your county judge or, you know, on the committee for broadband for your town. It doesn't mean they actually understand all the nuances. So, you know, be that person that's like really pushes to find accessible language. I think that's a role that non-techies can play.
I'm sorry I came in late, and I don't know if you've already covered this, but I was talking with someone from the Oregon Public Utilities commission today because about internet issues. And they reinforced to me that internet is not a utility that is covered by the regulations and oversight of the Utilities Commission, and that the only way that that can change is at the federal level with the Federal Communications Commission. And if they decide to consider internet as a basic utility, then that would then in turn authorize the states to start oversight and regulation. And, it seems that in all of where I live and all the challenges and struggles to come up with decent internet, we're a consumer and we have a lot of potential options that are all lousy as far as I'm concerned. They're expensive, they're not adequate. And that I think we need to pay attention to trying to get internet service designated as a essential utility at the federal level. And I think that's what brought telephone service to rural areas and many other kinds of services. And if we just keep chasing, and that's what I've been doing. That's what we've been doing with our neighbors, is just chasing, well, what do you hear? What's the best thing? This satellite, service, that satellite service, where can we get it? And essentially it comes down to finances. I mean, there's no incentive for, profit-based internet providers to bring service to rural areas. It's just not there unless there's some kind of incentive or requirement or grants or something. And I think, obviously internet has become an essential utility so that we can all stay informed and participate in democracy and in our communities, and especially with COVID. And I hope that people understand that, and we can put the pressure on the FCC ultimately, and so that can start trickling down to the states, and we could get more oversight and regulatory control over internet providers, and make certain requirements. If they're going to operate an internet provider service, then they have to agree to provide services to remote areas, and just like the telephone service did.
Thank you, Michael. Oh my goodness. I do not want this conversation to end, but it is almost 8 o'clock. We're going to keep this rolling. Put in the chat, we're going to keep this rolling in other formats as the weeks and months progress. So please do put in the chat kind of what you're taking away from this, what perked your interest the most, or what you're really wanting to chew on with your group or with your local community. And I'm going to kick it over to Jess so we can close us out for the night.
Hi, everyone. For those of you who I haven't met yet, my name is Jess Campbell, and I have the distinct privilege of being an organizer and the director of the Rural Organizing Project, which is the best job in the world. And for those of you who are not so familiar with ROP, we are a network. That is the heart and soul of what we do, is we connect and we break rural isolation. And I got to tell you, some of the stories that I loved about ROP when I first started hearing about ROP was that one of the very first initiatives back in 92 and 93 was to get a computer in every single county. So that way folks who had internet access meant that at least there was someone who could do email communication. So we could move a little bit faster than snail mail or relying on, kind of long distance phone calling. So there's a long history of rural people trying to figure out infrastructure so we can more effectively organize. And I'm just really grateful for everyone sharing their brilliance and also some vulnerability around. There's a lot of big words. There's a lot of jargon involved here. And it can be really overwhelming, but also how much enthusiasm is here and how much enthusiasm we've seen from folks who couldn't be here tonight, but are excited to drop in and participate however we can. So I would love if you all have space, if you're on the Zoom and you can drop into the chat box, one thing you're taking away, a question you're still chewing on, all of those pieces are really, really helpful, and it helps us determine our next moves as a network, as staff. It helps us see kind of where folks are at. So please take a couple minutes to drop those things in there. In the meantime, like I said, we're a network, and we're a network that has organizers here to support y'all. And so if you are really chomping at the bit to figure out, like, Bruce Kelch, not to call you out, but also to call you out. I saw your thing about EPUD. If that's something we want to move on, I would love to work on that with you. And who else would maybe want to participate in that, who are groups in Cottage Grove? And so if there's other layers of work that you are really excited about, you want to dig into further, your group is trying to figure some stuff out, or you're fired up and you're ready to start a co-op, please reach out to us. We're really excited to support folks doing the infrastructure building and the experimenting to kind of take some of this forward. I'm seeing stuff kind of pour in. Is there someone who's willing to do some reading out of the chat box for me?
Yeah, I'm seeing a question from Andy. How can my corporate employer best help on this issue via grants, donations, publicity, volunteers, etc., at national and local levels?
Ooh.
Great question. Yeah, really good question. Indira says affordability as well as access. The issue, make broadband a utility, and then keep up the work, you all. I also see Mary Beth is going to City Council to see what we can do to make connectivity more accessible and better speed. Yeah, Mary Beth, let us know how that goes and how we can help. That's super exciting.
Awesome.
Bruce says, thank you for hosting. Oh, sorry, Jess.
No, go ahead. You're on a roll.
Last one. Last one. Bruce says, thank you for hosting. My takeaway, if there are electrical cooperatives that already have a co-op structure, how can they become broadband co-ops as well? Yes, love that question. That's what we're thinking about too.
All right. Well, please keep it coming. We're really, really excited, as you can see, to have this conversation with you all. In the meantime, just so you know, we do these series of strategy sessions based on what folks are naming from the network and from the groups that they're excited to dive into further. And we do it for free. We didn't charge any kind of admission. And we do that intentionally because we want to try and keep this all as accessible as possible. But your donations matter so much. So if you feel so compelled, we would love your support. You can donate online at rop.org/donate. We are also going to have a whole bunch of other strategy sessions coming up. Please holler if you have great ideas about other strategy sessions. You're hungry to connect with other rural Oregonians around. We're always excited for suggestions. And we also have a Rural Caucus and Strategy session that is coming up that we're doing over Zoom this year. This is our second Zoom Rural Caucus and Strategy session, but maybe by the fall we can do something in person. But in the meantime, we're going to do something in May. So please keep an ear out, and we will certainly let you know when that's happening, where we're going to also have folks from across the state really diving into connecting the dots between issues and figuring out how we move together as a network. We also wanted to be explicit again that we are going to be sending out a recording of this conversation, the links. There's been a lot of great resources shared in the chat box. So if you have other links, please toss them in. We will include it in a follow-up email to everyone. And if you are interested in watching any of the video recordings of prior strategy sessions, they're available at rop.org/strategy session. So with that said, is there anything else, team, to cover, or are we closing this one out?
Closing it out. Thanks.
All right. Well, thank you all so very much for being on tonight. It was really a pleasure. Grateful for all your brilliance and all your questions and all your thinking. Have a great night, everyone.
Have a good one.